Good morning, folks, and welcome. I'm Rick Singleton, the Provost of Queen's College, and delighted today to welcome you to another in our series of continuing education for clergy and pastoral workers program. This is something we initiated 2 or 3 years ago now, and have had a variety of interesting topics, and have had guests from, we could say, all around the world present on different topics. But there's never more joy than when we have what we have today, the fusion and the presentation that we have on. Bishop John Watton is presenting on the Episcopacy and the Anglican Communion. So that one of our Newfoundland bishops present is wonderful. And on top of that, Bishop John is a student in the Master's of Theology program at Queen's, and is working on an overall theme related to episcopacy and what have you. So we're delighted to welcome you all, those who are attending here at the classroom on campus, those who are joining us online, and the many people who will take this in as part of as a viewing of the recording, which is one of the options that we brought to our continuing ed program. So again, welcome to you all. I'm going to pass it to our Dean, Reverend Dr. David Bell, who's Dean and Deacon of the College, to say a word as well.
And again, it's my pleasure, indeed privilege, to welcome Bishop John Watton, Bishop of Central, in the Central Diocese of Newfoundland and Labrador, and as the Provost says, also a student and a master student in the program at Queen's College. Part of our mission, in fact, a large part of our mission at Queen's, is to open up as widely as possible anything that we can give, anything that we can do to assist people, not just clergy and pastoral workers, but anyone who is interested in the Anglican Church, in spirituality, in theology, and in all things pertaining to the Church of Jesus Christ. So it's a great pleasure again for me to welcome Bishop John in this score. I'm eager to hear what he has to say about the Episcopacy and the Anglican Communion, and as the Provost also said, this will reflect in his own work on this matter, and when he eventually produces his thesis on the Episcopacy, then it will be a very great pleasure, certainly for me, to be able to read it. So welcome, Bishop John, and over to you and to everyone else who is eager now to hear what you have to say.
And I should say also that our secret goal, that we don't publish it to anyone, is that we really look forward to Bishop John putting this series of writings together into a book so that the whole broader church have it for the future. So
No pressure.
Absolutely. No pressure. We wouldn't say no. But we will take a moment to start, as we always do, our classes and occasions with a prayer, and let us pray. Creator, we turn to you today with open minds, open hearts, to hear from Bishop John's experience, his studies, his observations, reflections, and his own humble listening to the Spirit breathed through him as he has inquired about the episcopacy and lived it in years of ministry and observed it many years as a priest and a member of the church. We ask today, Lord, that you strengthen all of us, that we be aware of the power and capacity of your Spirit to bring unity to the church, to all believers in Jesus Christ, and to all who pursue what is right and good, that your Spirit be alive and well in us, and that as we approach the season of Advent, that we do so knowing that it's good for us to ponder, to prepare to make the way for the Lord. We ask this through Christ the Lord.
Amen.
Amen. So,
Amen.
Take it away, my friend.
Okay. I realized something already, that we've mounted our webcam on a shelf, and all you can see is the top of my head. And anyway, so I apologize for that, but it's probably the best part of me anyhow. Dr. Bell taught me when I was in university in 1986, and we were both young then. No, but I have great memories of him, and we were all terrified of him, actually. He was too brilliant for us, I can assure you. Anyway, he said that he's anxious to hear what I have to say, and I would couch that in this particular saying that I heard when I was in Canterbury.
Yeah.
Bishop, tell me what you feel so I can disagree with you. But anyway, thank you for the invite, Rick, and for the task, of course, that you assigned. And I'm glad to do it. Really glad to network with the Queen's College community. And I think the purpose of today is to sort of share a little bit about me as a Newfoundlander who became a bishop. And then perhaps I'll tell you a little bit about the settling in experience that I had, and then the journey to Canterbury, and then we'll have a chance to talk a bit about the future of the Episcopal ministry, perhaps, and the challenges, and then a little bit about the religious landscape. And I think that's quite a bit for this morning, isn't it?
Yeah. Sounds like lots, indeed.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll tell you who I am. My name is John, and my roots are on Change Island, and some of you know that. I was a young fellow who was brought up in different parts of the country, because my father was in the military, and as a result of that, we moved around a little bit. But long story short, is my parents didn't get along very well. My father had a lot of problems with alcohol and self-esteem. My mother was a war bride who went through some hard times in the Second World War. And honestly, at this stage in my life, I look back and I see how ill-equipped they were to raise children or even to be married. And I've moved in my spiritual to loving the two of them. Hello, Rick.
Yeah.
And you know, so there's a lot I could say about that. My father would say this. I'll leave you with this image. My dad died in my arms, and as I held him, I said, "Dad, I love you." And on my father's headstones, ransomed, restored, healed, and forgiven. And every word is true. Both of my parents are gone. The only reason why I really mention them is because my father instilled in me a great fear of God. You know, I think I see two Roman Catholics at that table there, and for me, the image I had of God was like, God's going to get you. God is out to get you, and you better do what you're told, and you better listen up, or otherwise you're in trouble. And Karen, I don't know if that's something you can relate to or not. But
yeah, my mother used to tell me when I was a really small child, when she wasn't there, if I was out playing, she'd say to me, because she knew I sometimes did things I shouldn't, she'd say, "Now remember, Holy God is watching you."
Well, you know, it's a long story, and we don't have a whole lot of time for that this morning. But I think what I like for people to realize about me is that I was a street kid who could really relate to the Psalm. I'm not sure which one it is offhand. I think it's 113, where God rescues that which has been thrown in the garbage heap. And my first years as a Christian. Where I was very much a fundamentalist in the sense that I really had a sense that I had been rescued. And so, Dr. Bell, every time I think about those days at Queen's, I do think about you, you know. I remember doing an introduction to the New Testament with him, and he looked around and he had this glare, and he said, "No, if any of you use your papers to preach at me, I will fail you with the greatest of pleasure. And I knew from that minute I was going to love you. Anyway, but my journey, of course, took me into the church, and been a priest now since 1990, and served in this diocese since that time. I was nominated in 3 separate elections to become a bishop. The first one resulted in a stalemate in our diocese. Some of you would remember that. We prorogued our synod. Second synod, I took my name off on the second ballot because I certainly didn't feel called to the office at the time, and I didn't want the diocese to go through that again. And I suppose in one sense it was timely, because shortly after Bishop Torval was in office, it wasn't too long after that I was diagnosed with throat cancer, and it was very serious, to the point where I had 8 months of treatment and recovery, and really they didn't think I was going to survive. So here I am, you know. I survived, obviously, and now I'm wearing a purple shirt. I was elected almost 2.5 years ago, and it's been incredibly interesting. Now I'm not my theology shifted. Obviously, if it hasn't shifted by the time you turn 59, you're in trouble. But I still believe in God's grace. I believe in the power of love, and completely sold out to our church and to the gospel. I may read it a bit differently now. I hope you all do. So there it is, you know. In regard to the kind of bishop I am, well, I'm being forced to be a kind of a bishop because there's a lot that's beyond my control now. I can look around at your table there, and if I could, to those who are going to be watching this on YouTube or whatever it's going to be, and ask you, you know, what do you think a bishop is supposed to be? And we're going to end up with a whole diversity of descriptions of what a bishop should be, what a bishop is, and it's no matter what you say about a bishop, in 2 or 3 days' time, that description is going to need to change.
Folks,
well, I'll come back to that.
Just give us a moment, Bishop John. Somebody must have on their microphone, and we're getting a bit of interference from it. So I just ask people to make sure they mute their microphones, except when it's time to ask a question or make a comment. Faye, maybe
that's a good idea.
Maybe your microphone might be on. If you could turn it off.
What, my microphone?
No, Faye's was on, but I. Oh
yeah. Morning, Faye.
It's back on again, Rick.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Great. Continue, Bishop John. Sorry about that.
All right.
Thanks, Faye.
No, that's quite all right. I just want to sort of say to you, like when I was elected, the electoral experience is different in every diocese as well, you know. And here in Central, we do not have previous nominations. When we hold an electoral synod, nominees are presented on the floor at the synod. There is no pre-nomination or anything like that. And so we go to the synod. I think the same with all synods is that the person who is lowest on the ballot will get dropped. And the fact that we don't have nominations beforehand is sort of perhaps a little bit different to what some are used to. And anyway, at our synod, it ended up all the nominees were, Colonel Moyer, I'm not that bad, am I? all of our nominees were dropped until there was only one left. And I think I was shy 1 vote or 2 votes with the clergy. And so there had to be one more ballot. And the ballot that I had to face was, do you want John as your bishop or not? Yay or nay? anyway, so that was interesting. Yeah, that was interesting because it's it's the final word from synod, and I had to take that. I had to take it, and so I did. And so after that, I was consecrated and installed at the same service. I think some of you may have been there for that. That's enough about that, I think. Now, in the first part of the year past, now this year, I went to Canterbury because Canterbury has a school for baby bishops. And that experience was incredible. Never been in the UK before. And so everything was new, even from going through customs and going through the border guard, in Heathrow, and finding my way to Canterbury. It was incredible, actually. What I'm going to do now, Rick, if I run into trouble, you can help me with this, but I have a document here. Can you see it okay, guys?
Okay, it's not opened yet. Okay, got it now, yeah.
On my screen. And so I'll quickly go through that. This is a document, folks, that's available to you. It's on Google, and if I knew how, I could send you the links, but I can certainly do that afterwards if you want. So in February, I went to the UK, and you'll notice up here, if you can see up here in this corner, I chose the diocesan logo, and I called it Bringing Our Diocese to Canterbury. I had a great sense of, when I was going there, that one thing about a bishop is that a bishop is the diocese, and you have to constantly remember that wherever you go and whatever you do, you are representing every person, every hope, every dream, every congregation, every joy, every struggle. And so a phrase was sent to us from the bishops from Lambeth 88. When you come, you bring your diocese with you. And so I used this as a logo in all my correspondence. I wrote our clergy a note, I think just about every day, and posted on Facebook and let people know that they were in my prayers while I was there. And so when you walk into Canterbury, when I arrived there, got off the bus, I think some of you have been there before. The streets are cobblestone largely. And so I grabbed my suitcase and I started walking, and I found the cathedral, and I went to the Canterbury Lodge where we were staying and checked in. And I got to tell you, I was dog tired. I traveled almost 2 full days without sleep, really. But I checked in, and then I said, I have to go over to the cathedral. And so you walk into the cathedral. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but right, these are the streets of Canterbury, and this is the gate that you go through. Maybe I can make it a little bit bigger for you, but if you look at the gate, it's kind of huge, and there's this bronze statue of Jesus up here on top. When you go in there, you realize you're really stepping into a gated community, about 26 square miles, actually. And you see this building that you've heard about, that you've read about. And I decided that I needed to go right away. So I did. I walked in, and you see this right away. When you look to the right, you see the entrance to the chapel. That doorway that you see there leads to the place where we held the daily offices and Holy Communion. And if you turn to your left and go straight through, you actually stand in the place where Thomas Becket was murdered. Yeah. And it's just an incredible experience when you walk in, because it hits you. At least it did for me. I was home. And for us who are Anglicans or Church of England, or who have a connection to that tradition, I was amazed. When I walked in the door, I looked over there, and I just started to weep, honestly. Couldn't stop myself. And one of the guys walked by, and he looked at me and said, don't worry, Bishop, it happens to all of you. So it was just, yeah, you know, it wasn't new for them, but it was overwhelming for me. So anyhow, this is Trinity Chapel facing the east. The very east end of the church, and then right up in the very end, there's a chapel of martyrs there, of all Christian martyrs, and it's also a place where they have a candle burning in memory of St. Thomas, constantly burning there. And if you turn to the west, you see that there's also an altar there and a whole different, almost a completely different cathedral. It's under renovation now. And here's the crowd that I met over there. 33 new bishops at the time, from all over the world. And there were 3 of us there from Canada. Myself and Jenny Anderson was there, and hang on a second, I'm trying to remember the other one. Jenny and I hung out a lot, but anyway, there were 3 of us there. And all new bishops, you know. There was one there that was only been a bishop for 2 weeks. So, and that perhaps one of the things that happened for me at Canterbury was I got to meet some real people there. Robert Willis is one of the most gentle and profound people I think I've ever met. He's got a couple of hymns in the English hymn book. Just incredibly gentle with people, carries out his duties with precision when it comes to worship, just completely involved with the cathedral and as dean. And I tell you, he taught us a lot and didn't know he was doing, I think, but just incredibly committed to the cathedral. And of course, they have over 300 paid staff there, and volunteers going everywhere. And I think you can probably see it on the screen there. He says that our goal as a cathedral is to receive each one who comes with the utmost hospitality and transform them into a pilgrim. And so the words that they use, the phrase they use, is that this cathedral belongs to you, and there were no places where you couldn't go. If it was open, you could go in there, and I spent a lot of time just going back and forth, looking, exploring, visiting the shrines, and there's the dean there, and just watching the life and flow of the rhythm of worship there. There's hundreds of young people who attend worship there. They go to school there. There's a music program there. This particular guy here found me after the Sunday Eucharist. This guy right here, and he's from Aquafort. He said he heard there was a Newfoundland bishop there, and he came and found me. So we went and had tea. Quickly now, moving along, just so you get a view of the cathedral. The dean took us on a tour and told us the story of the World War II bombing, where Canterbury was under attack, and people were on the roof of the cathedral shoving off the fire bombs so that the building would survive. And here you have, of course, the ancient chair of St. Augustine. I sat in it, and nothing happened. Here's the choir where we attended regular worship. One of the junior choirs that they have there, there's several choirs. People travel from all over the UK to go to Canterbury, and they are involved in the worship. They're invited to participate and lead whatever worship there is. Moving along. Okay, so I was there to go to school. And the dean of the cathedral did say to us, you're going to learn more from each other than you are from the teachers. And there was a lot of truth in that. So very quickly run down through the program. We had several days of classes. And of course, Tim Thornton is the bishop of the Falkland Islands. And he was pretty cool, pretty relaxed guy. And he talked about bishops, and actually made us laugh at one point. I think it was Tim that said the biggest barrier to ecumenical relationships are bishops. But he talked about unity, and the bishop as a focus of unity, and the problems that we have if we do not have unity. It impedes mission, compromises any witness we assume to have, diminishes our capacity to speak of justice. And I think how that connects to our own diocese in terms of buildings, in terms of finances, in terms of amalgamating parishes, and certainly in terms of discussion about the marriage canon. One of the things that I'm in the process of doing now is creating a new handbook for our clergy to talk about the things that we need in terms of unity in our diocese. I'll speak about that in a bit. Dr. Jean Gibault works with the Anglican Communion, and he's the director for Unity, Faith, and Order. And like I said, it was a wake-up call on that particular he said bishops, these guys said it, are by ordination are a block to ecumenical relationships. And when he said that, we all started paying attention, I'll tell you, because that was probably the first challenge to who we are as bishops. And, you think about our own diocese and our own ecumenical relationships, of course, and as he was talking, I became very aware of some of the concerns that I had as a parish priest and now as a bishop. And so he reminded us that we might have our own judgments and say this is what a bishop should be and what a bishop should do. And if another diocese or province is not doing what we're doing, we probably should reconsider their values and their standards. And if you look at it ecumenically, churches have different standards concerning age, retirement, and marriage. And some communities of faith have rejected bishops, and I can't even imagine why. And here, and when you see that, for example, our bishops in the Anglican Church of Canada, at age 70, you have to leave office. So, in other places, you don't have to at all. Different ideas about retirement, marriage, and so on. And so we were reminded, and I really don't want to, I could take all the time going through this document, but that Anglican bishops must remember they're prime movers and influencers in each diocese. And I tell you, as a bishop, folks, that's really hitting home for me. Wherever you go, bishops are expected to be the ones in charge. They give you that. People give you that. The clergy give you that. And yet, what's a problem for us now is that when we say, okay, I'll make this judgment and I'll call you into unity on this matter, if they don't agree with you, nowadays people don't agree with you and nothing happens. And it's a frustrating energy that's in the church that we have to deal with. People are not as inclined to give authority to an institution or someone who's a member of that institution. I don't know if you can relate to that, but I'm hoping you might have some questions for me about that. Okay, so anyway, that's about ecumenism and unity. And Jim Walters was the speaker on Episcopacy for the Sake of the World. And of course, he's talking there about Christianity in general, as well as the Anglican Communion. And if you can see the page there, he opened with this rhetorical question: have we reached the end of the West? And it is an eye-opener, simply because it's stuff that we've been talking about and we need to focus on. So, Rick, when you guys do your course on spiritual entrepreneurship, these are things that you're going to have to think about. And there's no getting away from it. Democracy is being challenged. Free trade doesn't work because of protectionism. Human rights are a major issue. And part of the problem that we're seeing in the world is that countries are protecting themselves so much that human rights no longer matter. There's no guarantee that any human being is going to be treated fairly in any country anymore. If you watch the news last evening, you see even people from the United States trying to get across the Canadian border. Secularism, and of course there's been a large movement, not only in Western thinking, but all over the world, away from traditional practices and religious beliefs. If you're going to be talking about spiritual entrepreneurship or innovative theology, of course, you have to talk about those things. Anyhow, I'm gonna keep Bishop and liturgy. Dr. Belloc has spent a lot of time talking about that, but I'll just say this. One of the things that in particular that Dr. Stevens said to us, he pointed at our purple shirts and pectoral crosses and spoke about the mitre and the robes that we wear and the bishop's staff. And he said, even though times have changed, these are still symbols of authority. These are still signs of a power that's been given to you by your church. He said he wanted to impress upon us how important it was for those to become not signs of power that say, if you want to get to the altar, you have to go through me. What he said to us was, these things that we wear should be signs of our servanthood and humility. And we should be nothing more than a signpost that points the way to the altar. And we should help our brothers and sisters get there. And so there's that underlying theme that's there. And if you quickly look at this, you can see why. There's a lot of material in this paper, so I'm making it available, of course. And Dr. Rick, you would have a copy of it in your email.
Yeah, a copy already, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad to send the link out. If you read it online, of course, to see the pictures in color. And so you can see there he defined the role of a bishop. And as I move into the next part of my little talk with you, keep that in mind, what's on top there. The bishop is the focus of unity. And that doesn't mean the bishop acts alone, does it? It means the bishop acts because the diocese is in unity. One thing I appreciated, he talked about churches that have put fonts on wheels. And he said there's a theology there where people say that they need to move the font out of the way so they can have their performances and do different things. And he said, well, as far as he was concerned, you should put the font there and leave it there. The font should be in the way. That's the whole point of our baptism.
Okay, Bishop John, we've lost you now.
Hard to bring a rock and roll band in when the font was there, but it was very touching. And so he again spoke about the marks of mission that you're all familiar with. And if we look at our community with loving eyes, and I extend that to our diocese and to our 3 dioceses here in Newfoundland, we'll see that there is a diversity of model, strategy, and practices that are appropriate to each context. We're not in a plurality of mission because there's one mission, but we are certainly have different ways of doing that. And of course, Rowan Williams, we were reminded that someone said, how do you know if this is a church, a real church? And he said, in the Anglican context, according to Rowan Williams anyway, if a bishop shows up, you have a church. Now, Bishop Trevor, he was a firecracker. I wish we could bring him to Queens. You guys would absolutely love him. What he spoke to us about was a bishop that can be in this for the long haul, about prayer, about trust, about staying in touch with your ordination vows, and about having to bear the burden of always loving, no matter how much you've been hurt. And of course, as I've already mentioned, the symbols of ministry. Then we had this guy who came in, and some people love this stuff and other people don't, but he spoke about canon law, the Anglican communion, very detailed. And he was really good at connecting theology to canon law. You don't often get that, but he was, he spelled out some things for us, of course. As some of you may know or may not know, in the Church of England, the canon law is not an authority for the entire communion. As a matter of fact, the Archbishop of Canterbury is not an authority for the entire communion. He is a visible sign of our unity. If the Archbishop desired to come to visit us here in Central, he would have to ask permission from the bishop. In fact, maybe you all know this, but even if our primate, Fred Hiltz, wants to come and visit us here, he has to ask permission from the diocesan. Fred has no authority in our diocese whatsoever. And just to make it clear, neither does the Archbishop of the province of Canada. Each bishop in each diocese in our polity is autonomous. One thing that he mentioned here is, I believe the Chancellor should be a Christian. And he spoke about the realities, of course, that some of the churches in our greater community are facing. There's a lot of violence and financial hardship. One of the things about being at Canterbury is that we were able to meet with the people at the Anglican office there, and we had a question and answer period. And one of the things that sort of hit me as I was talking and listening to the stories of our brothers and sisters from different parts of the world, especially Africa, was the price that they have to pay just to be a Christian church. During the discussion, one thing hit me, it was in relation to our debating the marriage canon. Specifically, what is going to happen to our relationship with them if the Canadian Church passes that canon? And how do I impress upon you as a bishop the depth of the emotion I felt around that table, looking at these people who rely on the West for so much, and we in Canada are wrapped up in this discussion about human sexuality, and as important as it is, I wonder, are we really weighing the consequences it's going to have in global relationships and our ability to walk in fellowship and support these people? It was one of the moments when I was pretty close to tears. So I'll just leave that with you to think about. And of course, you have the obligatory a wellness person come in and do a motivational talk. She was good, not unique, but we walked around with ropes, and tied each other to each other, and we shared our stories. And they called it relationship mapping. Some pretty good stuff going on there. I think we're pretty good at that in Canada. But anyway, and then we have Josiah. Boy, I tell you, Josiah was more of a firecracker than the other guy. He was no holds barred in his discussion. He's the Secretary General, and he was able to draw every one of us to see the points that should be common to us in our Anglican communion. And you can read that there. God's truth for God's world in the context of being a bishop is not only reference to a local context, but to the role of the bishop of the church globally and ecumenically. And so he asked us, he said, now, look at your own ministry in your diocese, look at your own ministry in your national church, and ask yourself, are you a focus of unity or a focus of disunity? And he said, bishops need to know what's current. You can't give what you don't have in your mind and heart. And then, and again, he very, very motivated when he said this, animated, really. And he said the problem with Anglican people is that they don't love the church and they don't love the communion. No passion for it. And he said, did you ever hear a Roman Catholic say, I'm a Christian? And we all looked at him and he said, no, probably not. He said, Catholics know that they're Catholic. And he compared that passion that seems to be missing in our church to that he finds in the Roman Catholic communion. Anyway, are you smiling, Carmel?
I don't know what I'm doing, John. I know I'm smiling here or thinking very deeply.
Okay. How are we doing so far?
She is thinking of many
Am I doing okay, guys?
I am thinking, yes, I am.
I'm sorry, Bishop Daniel, how we're doing time-wise. We're doing great. We have we have about 45 minutes. Now continue on. It's very interesting.
Yes.
Interesting stuff.
All right, thank you. So this particular presentation was, so you can imagine the energy. You're sitting in a room filled with bishops, and we are there, baby bishops, and we're serious about this, and we're serious about it from our own context. And you're in this meeting, and all these connections are being made, and of course you wonder then about Lambeth. How powerful will that be, and how challenging will that be? I want to get through this because I do want to give you a chance to ask questions, of course, and maybe speak about the Canadian House of Bishops as well. Well, he says, in the communion, bishops are expected to love God and the church. Is this true of you? Is the integrity and well-being of our community important to you? And do you accept that that's your primary responsibility? And as you examine yourself, is there someone you won't take communion from? And if not, you should be able to answer why. And so he obviously had a lot to say. And these are notes that I took during the talk, and I sat down afterward and turned them into a paper. And I have another probably about 20 pages of notes from Canterbury. So, here is our unity. As a bishop, Scripture and faith in Jesus, regardless of how we interpret Scripture, we are joined together by sacraments and, of course, in our tradition, by the bishop. We recognize one another on the basis of apostolic faith. We make a mutual commitment to love each other, to stand by each other, to respect each other in spite of differences. And we are joined together in a sacramental life of the church, wherever we go. And I hope you can see what's there. This is a fantastic quote from him. Our Anglican communion is a miracle and it's beautiful. Around the communion, we are united by apostolic faith, and we cannot say to each other, I have no need of you. As bishops, you're called to make sure that every voice in your diocese is heard and to keep the family of Jesus together, united in Christ. If that is how you see your ministry and you pray, the church will flourish. And some of you know that when I was elected bishop, in less than 2 weeks, I was on the floor of General Synod. And the main issue there, of course, for us was the first reading of the marriage canon change. I voted in favor of the motion and stated quite openly that I did it so that we would have discussion in the diocese. And I made a statement very clearly that every voice in our diocese had to be heard. And so when I heard him say that, that was a big amen for me. And I've stuck to that. And some of us have suffered because of it. Trevor was a pastor to us. And he was there to share wisdom for the journey. What he offered would have been a great retreat for a priest, any of us who just need to sit back and be still and think about where we are, where we're going. And so it was sort of almost a wind up of some of the sessions, and it was really very helpful to us. And after that, of course, after each session, we ended up going to prayer. And so he reminded bishops, of course, that prayer must be at the heart of your ministry, even if you're exhausted. He quoted Mother Mary Clare, Sisters of the Love of God, and she said, her prayer is one sentence: "Here I am, what a mess." And of course, a quote from Saint Augustine, which a lot of us could relate to. And I think a lot of us in ministry today too. In all these things that I rush through, questioning you, I find no safe for my soul, except in you, where my scattered parts may be gathered together, and nothing might fall out of me away from you. So he spoke a fair bit about things, about contemplation, and as he was talking, of course, I was writing and thinking about what I was doing there, and was connecting the dots of experiences I've had over the past 3 years, and different people I've met, like Archbishop, presiding Bishop Michael Curry, met him in Toronto, and of course Verna Dozier, who I would imagine most of you would know. She has written much about God's dream and about the need for a generous way of looking at what Jesus has done for all of us. So there is that, and of course, keeping your enthusiasm alive has to do with, of course, realizing in your own life what it is that excites you, what is it that energizes you, and some of the things that you're doing that you probably shouldn't be doing because you're either not qualified or you're not well enough to do them. Ephesians chapter 4 tells us that, that some of us are prepared for certain types of ministry, and if we're doing the ministry we're called to, we'll be filled with joy about it. And how could you not have a session with a quote or two from Herbert O'Driscoll, speaking about self-esteem, vulnerability, and failure, and on it went. So then we went to the Anglican Communion office, and I've already shared a bit about that. What we did there was that everybody who works with the Anglican Communion office took time and sat with us, and they talked about what they do. And so you can see here the different things that we listen to, and I don't know what's happening there. Okay, and so we you can go down through them yourself. I can read them to you, but there's just a lot there. But you can see that the Anglican Communion is a pretty busy place, right? Unity, faith, and order, finances, resources, women's issues. I shouldn't say women's issues, they're all of our issues, but the role of women in church and society, the Anglican Alliance, which has to do with outreach and programming. Promise World Relief is involved with that as we network to make the dollar go as fast and as far as it can. Theological education. And I'll tell you, those of you who don't know it, there is an incredible resource database on the Anglican Communion website. There's an incredible amount of material that they share. It's all free, and some really good publications. And so here we have hearing stories, as I've already shared with you. This is some of us in the room where we met. Can you see this particular fellow here? The guy with a little bit of a white on his beard?
Yeah.
We went to a pub to have a laugh and have some fish and chips and a beer, and we were Facebooking a little bit. And he said, "Please don't put my picture on Facebook." And everyone got, laughed a bit. And he said, no. He said, because I've traveled to be here, and there are people in my country, if they see me on social media, they will make assumptions about money that I've spent and the people I'm with. And he said, when I go home, I will probably be assassinated.
Wow.
And that's his life. That's his life. and of course we obviously respected that. This other fellow with the iPhone there is the Bishop of Mozambique. He's looking for a partnership. If any of you want to go visit him, we can probably make that happen. The African bishops were froze, constantly froze. There was snow on the ground. I was walking around with a light jacket on because it wasn't that bad for me. But these guys, when they arrived, they never had winter clothing, so the Canterbury staff went off looking for clothes for them, and made them pretty happy, I'll tell you. This is where we ate our meals. This is Kathy Miller, who was the coordinator of the conference. She loves punk music. And of course, this is Lucy, who before I left, I you know, they're all just a lot of young people that work there, and I have a rule in my own life, a 3-foot rule. You come within 3 feet of me, we're going to have a chat. And if you stay there for any more than 25 seconds, I'm going to start talking to you about Jesus. Yeah. This is Yori. He is tall. He's from Yugoslavia, and boy, what a friendly character. Just and the food was pretty good. No, well, okay, there's Anne Germain. That's the other Canadian. I was thinking of Mary Gibson, and Mary was there before us. Jenny Anderson right here from Toronto. Anne, who is the new metropolitan in the province of Ontario. This is Jeremy Greaves. He's a bishop in Australia. And this joker with the red jacket on, that's Mr. Bean. we went out for fish and chips, and even though I have trouble swallowing because of my throat, best fish and chips I ever had. And coffee in Canterbury is fantastic. And of course, we went to Lambeth Palace, and we had a chance to have a cup of tea with Archbishop Welby and Caroline, and they told to us that he was all business. I tell you, very friendly and warm, but he was on a schedule, and he tolerated a few pictures, and he called us my lords. He said, "My lords, I have to go," and with that, he was gone. Woof, out the door, gone. His wife Caroline's right here, over here to my left, and she spoke about the price that spouses sometimes had to pay, and again, you know, you could connect that to priestly ministry. But she said, don't ever forget that if you've been called to be a bishop and you're married, your wife has been called too, or your husband or your partner. And here we are. Some interesting folks among that crowd. As Bishop Eddie would say, we're a motley crew. This young lady here, I don't know if you can see her. This is Ellie Sanderson. Can you see my cursor moving here?
No.
No, probably not. Okay, but
yeah, now we can.
It's kind of hard to pick her up. Right there, yeah. She's a bishop in New Zealand. She's only the 4th bishop who was ever elected there who was a woman, and Ellie was elected when she was 40. And one of the things, of course, about being elected that young is that those bishops need prayer, because it's a long haul and it's a very stressful job. And Ellie and I are, well, actually, most of us, we started a prayer group that meets online regularly, and we pray for each other, and we share with each other, and some of us have kept in close contact. Anyway, these are just a few more pictures of the communion office, and I'm just going to quickly go down through. This is the oldest part of the Canterbury Cathedral. This is down in the basement. These paintings are, I'm not sure of the age, but they're hundreds of years old. They ask that you don't use your flash while you're taking pictures down there. Just a few views of the chapel. This one here is, you can see that, again, this is the other part of this particular one up here. Very, very old. It's down in the basement. all the way down and all the way to the east of the cathedral. Just a few pictures around. There's a cloistered area all the way around the cathedral, so you walk through these places and right through the whole cathedral. These crypts are everywhere. There's literally hundreds of people buried there. Down here, this is the Lady Chapel. That rear house there, I can't get the picture any bigger, I'm sorry, but you download the document, you'll be able to see them. It's made out of iron, and it's where we would meet for morning prayer. This guy, these two fellows, well, they've been there for a while. There's not only bishops there, but this guy right here, the white fellow, his name was Watton, Wotton. So there might be a connection. You never know. Walking around, I can't give you the names of all these people. There's just too many of them. But you can see, and this is the ruins of a monastery, part of the monastery, and the pharmacy that used to be there when the monks were living in Canterbury. Few gargoyles here and there, altars and chapels all over the place. The whole precinct has small churches there as well. I just love that door. Couldn't get in there. That one was locked. Oh. And all along the cathedral, when you walk along, you see all these crypts, and there are stories on them and inscriptions. And there's a guidebook in the cathedral you can purchase to tell you what everyone is. The King's School, there is a school on site. This is actually the gift store here when you walk in. Lots of people who studied in England came to Newfoundland, and there's a listing there of all the clergy who were in the UK who came to our province and to serve here. The staff at the lodge. There's a chapel there, the HMS Canterbury, and you can see it there. When you come in the door, they ring this bell once a day, and they have a page of memories there. And one of the veterans in the UK comes in and says prayers and turns the page in the Bible every day. To my left is the library, and we had a chance to look at some very, very ancient manuscripts there, handwritten, of course. And this one's kind of cool. The macabre was certainly a fixation in art during different periods of English history. And this particular tomb, as you can see, sort of speaks for itself. That's Joseph there. Just a guy who loved that hat. I tried to get him to give it to me, but he wouldn't do it. And this is some of the old stained glass in the cathedral. And here, there's a chapel of St. Martin, just a little place where you can kneel and pray. Obviously, I had to take a picture of that. This here is Henry.
Terry. Dr.
Bell, you might know. Henry, I'm not going to say the I think maybe the fourth, and his wife. I don't know if I can move this out of your way, but he's the only king buried in Canterbury. The only one there. There you go. Apparently, a number of years back, in modern times, he was exhumed for some reason, and they say that his body is in incredibly good condition for a dead guy. There's a part of the chapel reserved to commemorate Thomas Cranmer. And as I say, I'm just very quickly going. This particular crypt, of course, is an object lesson in who you are and who you will become. Very, very powerful piece of vernacular religion, I suppose you call it. Now here is the chapel of Thomas Becket. And I'm assuming you're familiar with the story of Becket, who was an archbishop that the king wanted him to sort of move his agenda, and Becket remained true to the teachings of the Roman Church and paid for it with his life. And you know the story is when the king said, "Well, not someone rid me of this troublesome cleric." And some of his guard took it seriously, and Becket was given this chapel at prayer, and you see the door that's there. They burst into that door, and on this spot right here is where they killed him. Anyway, here we go. Just a few pictures around the precincts and some more people who were there. These are not just statues. These people are there. And of course, up by the high altar, we have Elphage and Dunstan, who are buried on each side of the altar. And again, walking through the crypts and people buried everywhere you go. And so this again is part of the old monastery. There's Nicholas. I wonder if that name. I know I've seen some of our. I'm not saying I'm related to him. I don't want to call him Uncle Nick or anything like that, but I do know that my family name, our family from Northern England, and that's where our original name was, spelled with an O, not an A. It's probably been changed to Watton in Newfoundland because of a misprint in the church register.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think I've gotten you through that document, so there you are, and you can download that and have a look at it. It might be of some interest to you. We try to encourage new clergy, newly ordained priests to think about going to Canterbury. There's a school there for newly ordained priests as well. Now, any questions about that before I move on, or observations or reflections?
Very, very interesting. I think it'd be good for us to take a few minutes just to have a little bit of a debrief and decompression of it. So many interesting theological and pastoral points, especially about the role of the bishop. I found that was very intriguing. But you know what came to my mind as you were bringing it around with the photos and your experience there is the physical presence in a space and the way that we develop and use space and so on. It's not to be taken lightly, and sometimes I suppose we dismiss the space as if it is of no importance, but it is, especially heritage spaces. Yeah. And it's a challenge to the church everywhere now, of course, in how you manage spaces that aren't being used for their original purposes. Actually, yesterday I saw a thing that Pope Francis prepared a message for people who were discussing that issue of the decommissioning of churches and kinds of things that ought to be considered in making the decisions. He didn't say one way or another what ought to be done with any particular building, but the kinds of things that ought to be considered. Anyway, David, I'm going to ask you, because I know a familiar church to you. Any comment?
I've closed five churches in the time that I've been a bishop. I'm a bishop about 2.5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
5 churches. And we've also sold our church camp as well.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention
I just realized
that anyone that's online, please feel free to unmute yourself to make a comment or ask a question of Bishop John. But David, I know you were going to say something.
Oh, I was going to say that it was interesting for me. It was a sort of little voyage back in time. I visited Canterbury 3 or 4 times myself. I love the cathedral, it's a superb cathedral. And I also did a fair amount of work at one time on the 12th century archbishops of Canterbury. What I was really interested in, was what Bishop John had to say about the episcopacy, about the role of a bishop, function of a bishop, the nature of a bishop. And with the amount of material there is no doubt in my mind that we have the makings of an extremely good dissertation and the makings of what will undoubtedly, with a little bit of pushing from the Dean of Theology, become a very good book.
Indeed.
John?
well, I was looking at the time, and I realized that I could easily keep it for a couple of hours to talk about the present nature of the Episcopacy and some of the aspects of the changing landscape, but we don't have a whole lot of time, so whatever you want to do now, Rick. I'm fine.
I want us to get into that to the nature of it, but Carmen, you were going to have a question for Bishop John.
Question, comment. I'm not sure what it is. It's I suppose, the tension that exists for a bishop and for the House of Bishops, and then for the bishops throughout the communion, to be able to, I guess, prayerfully discern the relationship between the prophetic role that the church and thus the bishop as part of the church needs to engage, and to understand that that prophetic role can very often cause, or can seem to break the communion of bishops. Like you mentioned about the marriage canon. I mean, we know here in our own country that there's a tension between the bishops in the north, or the people in the north, and the rest of the country around this issue. I mean, that's just within one country. Yeah. We know that in various parts throughout the world that there are difficulties. This just happens to be this particular issue. But there's that really, I think is probably one of the key things that needs some work, or each individual bishop obviously has to come to terms with it herself or himself. That being like, how do you balance the prophetic role of the gospel, the church of Jesus, with maintaining unity within a communion? It just seems to me that it's a biggie.
Well, it's timely that you brought that up, but I just want to say this about the people in the north. Don't assume, and I'm not saying you are, I'm just speaking openly, and broadly here, that everyone in the north is against changing the marriage canon.
Oh, I don't think that's
there's a developed theology. Yeah, there's a developed theology in the north of two-spirited peoples. Yeah. And, so that's there. But, Carmel, I think part of the problem with some of our bishops, and I'm not talking about any individual, is that we have this idea that we're supposed to be prophets above unity sometimes, and so how do you balance that, right?
Yeah.
Now, and here's the other thing. Here's the thing I want to get at, is that I can be a bishop, and people can say, Bishop John, you are supposed to be the symbol of unity. You're supposed to be the teacher. You're supposed to be the one that ensures that we have rules and regulations to follow, that the canons are being followed. And so that's your job, and we expect you to do it. But now, just for example, I go down to this little town of Princeton, and I survey the scene, me and the archdeacon, and the people who are left in the church. We have an annual meeting, 3 people left, 3 people that left to contribute financially to the church, right?
Yeah.
And they make a motion to close the church. The church is on a piece of land where there was absolutely no way that building could ever be used for anything else because of land issues, and it's in the middle of a cemetery. We discerned that the building needs to be dismantled. Yeah. And I face a horrendous wave of keyboard warriors on Facebook and wherever they can find a place to have a poke at me personally, at the Anglican communion, at bishops, at clergy, at the church, and guide our people through that. So that's part of the problem of being a bishop today. Yeah. Is that there is an expectation of what you're supposed to be, but there's no acceptance of what you're supposed to be. And go back to my earlier statement. Bishop, tell me how you feel so I can disagree with you. Yeah. And it's intricate and it's complicated, but it's very much a part of being a bishop today.
Yes.
And our our clergy, I have to work double time with our clergy to remind them that every time I say something, or if I send out an ad clarem, or I remind them what's appropriate in communion or liturgical practice, that I am not trying to lord it over them. Yeah. I'm trying to create unity in the diocese, so we're all in the same place. And so there's room for local practice, there's room for local interpretation, but there has to be a unity of love and respect. And some of you may know that recently in Bonavista, for example, we had an incursion of Anik, incredibly painful experience, and you know, complete lack of regard for episcopal authority.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, that's the changing landscape. You see?
Oh, it is.
That's the changing landscape, right?
It takes a lot of discernment, and as you mentioned in your presentation, reflections back on presentations at Canterbury, you know, that the depth of prayer and the spiritual resilience, contemplation for one who's a bishop is very, very important, and it takes a lot of surrender, I'm sure. Bishop John, I'll ask you to move on with the next section that you were going to bring us to, so that we most of
it'll probably be very quick, so take a breath. But I'll get through just a few highlights, because I really would like to ask for a few questions. If not, of course, you can email me anytime. Most of the people that are here know me, and but again, talking about being prophetic in today's world, is that what we have to speak into is not what it used to be. There's an incredibly different landscape, and for example, if I were to say, it's in one of the papers that I wrote, we live in this age of interconnected technology. And what that means is that one person's ideas live in the same neighborhood as someone else's. And there's a lot more ideas in the neighborhood than there used to be. Yeah. And there's this growing dissatisfaction for traditional religion, and there's a rise in fundamentalism. And that has that's a two-edged sword too, because even some of the fundamentalists who act and commit acts of violence are not necessarily doing it because of religion. They're doing it because of ideology that's supported by their religion. Okay. There's a turning away in droves of young people. This is not new, but this is what we have to speak into. And growing discontent. This is important. Again, Carl, I wanted to bring back, you really did bring us back to the core of what this is about. There's a growing discontent in the lives of people who are now regular worshippers and regular contributors to the life of the church. Some of the biggest arguments I have, and I have to use that word, or some of the most difficult water I have to navigate through in parish meetings and council meetings, are people who have been involved and will look at me and say, well, I've been going to this church for 40 years and we ain't done nothing like that before. But then you ask them about Anglican thinking and traditions, and they haven't got a clue what you're talking about. Yeah. So there's been an evolution of congregationalism in our churches. And so it makes it hard for a bishop to speak into that as well. I'm thinking that we have to define the reality of the 21st century, because it ain't the church it used to be. And so we have to invest time in that. And we cannot take for granted the benefits and the challenges of psychology and science and art, the way that reveals the divine to people. And so, you know, we're competing, I suppose, if you want to call it. Some of you remember the old saying, I'm an atheist, thank God. Yeah, it took a while to get that one there, but, you know, my Uncle Eddie was an atheist. At least he said he was. Then he go off singing a hymn. There was a gentleness in atheism, because the culture would say, well, if you're an atheist, you keep your mouth shut because there's no room for you here. But the new atheist movement is saying, well, we're not going to go away. We're not going to be quiet. In fact, we're going to challenge religion to its very core. Yeah. And so there has been this explosion of atheistic apology in the world. and listen to me. Some of it makes sense.
Yeah.
And so we have to speak into that. And so these are the prophetic roles of the church. And bishops today, I would say to you, are incredibly vulnerable because we may have the preparation, we may have the anointing, we may have the ordination, but we can't do this on our own.
Yeah.
So leadership is incredibly important now. And when we have a board meeting or a vestry meeting or a parish council or diocesan executive, somehow we have got to get people talking about the real world we live in. And, we're talking about things like, I'll just throw out a few words because I won't have time to talk about them all, but, deconstruction. Some of you have read John Caputo, and Caputo talks about how it was Jesus' intent to deconstruct the church. Primary example is throwing over the tables in the temple. Take it apart, unpack this religion. He met with the Canaanite woman and he called her a dog. And yet that conversation turned into something that was life-forming for her. And so he's saying that Jesus did that not because of hatred, but because of love for the church. And unless we take it apart, God can't rebuild it. And so there's two questions for our leaders today. What is it about our church that God wants to deconstruct? And what is it about me that God wants to deconstruct? What is it about Queen's College that God wants to deconstruct, And so we have that. And then we're faced with the fact that our resources are dwindling. Those of us who are involved with parishes have seen a major decline in income. Here on the diocesan level now, we're trying not to raise assessments. We're looking at different ways of reinvesting money in areas that are important to us. We can no longer assume that things are going to be the way they were. And we also have to stop talking about God in the same way we've done for the last number of years. And I think if we're authentic about that, it'll bring new life into our worship and our traditions, and make our altars and our Eucharist beautiful once again. So when we're talking about declining resources, then we have a term that we use called innovative theology, innovative thinking, lean canvas. I have recently done a course in that, and how we approach this world with an entrepreneurial spirit, spirit of joy. And when I say that, I did a Facebook troll a few weeks ago, and I asked people, what do you think spiritual entrepreneurship is? And I'll send them along to you, Dr. Rick, so you'll have a copy of them. There were some really good answers. And one person, though, hit the nail on the head. Well, I think about business. I think about religious charlatans trying to sell prayer cloths and holy oil. And that's part of the image. But the other side of it is, as spiritual entrepreneurs, we're going into the world the way it is and trying to bring the mission, the Great Commission, into the world that we find ourselves in. And so spiritual entrepreneurship is it's important, but again, it may not be what you think it is. And so we've got to sit around and talk about that and face some very challenging things. So now I'm getting down to the last 10 minutes. So man, there's so much more. I got all of this here that I wanted to share with you. But anyway, loving the problem. It's important. I had a priest call me a couple of weeks ago on a tizzy, Sunday morning. And he might be online. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's a good story. And anyway, a tree fell across the church. So we get a text, and oh my, we're in trouble now. There's a tree across the church, and my goodness, we're struggling congregation. How are we going to deal with this? What do we do? Do I call insurance? Do I call the police? Do I call the Archbishop of Canterbury? Anyway, and I left it alone. And after that afternoon, Stephen got in touch and I said, any damage done? He said, no damage, no, not that big a deal. But I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if your first thought was, there's a tree across the church. How awesome is that? Now we have the opportunity to get new people involved, because this is something that will draw attention toward our church and community. It's a shift in attitude. We have got to learn to love the problem, not the solution. There's no point in me offering a strategic plan to the diocese and say, no, if you do A, B, C, and D, we're going to be just fine. Because all that does is give me a scapegoat if they don't do A, B, C, and D, and it doesn't work. It's not going to work. We have to love our problem and not the solution. And I think when we start doing that, we're in for a lot of brand new adventures. It's going to be a great time. I'll be quiet now. I think I've spoken enough. I'm just getting warmed up, though.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to your presentation in the winter when we have our course on theology of mission. You're going to do a presentation on spiritual entrepreneurship, but it will give us opportunity to examine some of the current challenges through a bit of a different lens and different language as well, which I guess they go hand in hand. But I'm just going to throw it open for anyone who's online who might have a question or comment or observation to share with Bishop John or any of the rest of us, and those who are here in this room. Please pitch in.
Hey, Bishop John.
Hi.
Yeah, this is Dale Green here. Do you think that with our new outlook on church and where we're going, do you see a platform for sacred activism as a new direction for church and for where people should be looking?
I love the phrase you use, sacred activism. And yeah.
You
probably need to unpack that a little bit more for me.
I'd like you to give a bit of a description of that, just for the benefit of those who are listening.
Well, activism as it can be, people can be misguided and misled when heading out to do a good purpose in society. We can be led the wrong way. But me coming from a Christian standpoint, being more inclusive of everybody in the community working for the common good of the community. Doesn't matter what your tradition is, Jesus Christ is my path to follow, and I don't care if yours is Ganesh or whoever, but being guided by our bishops and by those in our church, sacredly opening our arms to our communities and solving problems.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Again, and not to draw attention to the problem, but if you're a member of a local ministerial, what you'll find is that these are the influencers, in a community. If you can get people who are willing to do exactly what you've said and place that above their denomination, some incredibly good things are happening. Mm-hmm. Again, being a bit prophetic, I believe the Holy Spirit will not be denied. And what I see happening in different communities is that young people, some of them are secular, and people of all ages are coming together in communities and making a huge difference. You look on any of the local television stations, and you'll see that even in Newfoundland, millions of dollars are being raised for the Janeway. We have people in our diocese who go to Africa every 2 years, and it has little to do with the church. Although when they get there, they're connected to a church. So I think that's where God would have us go. And what I would say to you is I would beg you to pray for the leaders of the church, because that will not happen until we let all the stuff that is a symbol of our office gets out of the way so that we can do that. And part of the changing landscape is that these good things are happening. I just wish they were coming from the church and instead of the church, you know?
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
I support a lot of secular charities on my own because it gives me a doorway to just do some good things that I see the church being handicapped and not able to do it. I support food banks that are not affiliated with churches. I support music groups that are not affiliated with churches, youth organizations that are out in the community doing good things and who are not part of churches. And they accept me. But when I walk in the door, I'm not their bishop. I'm a supporter, and I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you're a person that's being led to that, God will probably use you in our society and in our church to wake us up.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments to Bishop John?
An observation, neither a question or a comment, just an observation. It's really heartening to see a bishop being able to step back from the really heavy demands of what the day-to-day work is and be able to step back a little bit to be able to meditate, to research, you can use whatever word you want, on what the role really is, because it's really easy for anybody in any role, but I think even more so that of leadership, and maybe even more so leadership in the church, where it's easy to get on the train and never question where you've been or what's happening, but be constantly having to be looking to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, because there are so many next things that are demanding. And it's just really heartening to see someone who's taking a step back to examine what's actually happening in the here and now. So it's like I said, it's an observation. I think it's gives me a sense of hope. It could be a sacred resting spot in the midst of the madness. To put it in more who we're called to be, rather than necessarily what we're always called to do. But I just find it really heartening, Bishop John, that you're undertaking this. I think I think in and of itself, it is a prophetic sign for others to maybe once in a while give themselves the permission to do something similar. And I look forward to being able to read and continue conversation with you on the fruits of that stepping aside or diving in at another level, whatever words you want to use for it. So I just thank you for the fact that you're willing to do this.
Thank you. Just a brief comment about the House of Bishops, the Canadian House of Bishops. We've had a third of the House change since the last General Synod. So that's 1/3 of the House that have never voted on the marriage canon and other things. And at the present time, 1/3 of the Canadian House of Bishops are women. A lot of the newer bishops that are coming in are actually females. And when I go to the House, it's tense sometimes. Some people get really into these debates, but by and large, I have an optimistic view of the House of Bishops in Canada. We are very aware that we are to be the visible sign of unity, and that's something I always bring up every time I have a chance to say a prayer at the House.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to each other. And the other thing that happened nationally too, and this is of interest to Queen's College, of course, is that our church has what we call ACPO, the Advisory Committee for Postulates to Ordination. And ACPO came into being around 1969. Interestingly enough, it was to provide an outside voice and a national voice to discernment processes. And of course, ACPO was designed in those days for single young men who, if they were approved, would end up in a seminary.
Yeah.
So you can imagine now how that works today.
Yeah.
So I've been given by the House of Bishops the job of national oversight for postulancy and for discernment. So we're rewriting that book too, and I'm off this week to a meeting about that. So that might be of some interest to you guys when I get back. Anyway, we're working on that, and it's a good thing. It's positive. It's all positive.
Yeah. But that is like the ACPO thing, and we can just take a moment on it. I think the whole issue and challenge for diocese bishops really across Canada, and I guess around the world, but across Canada, it reflects the changes in the church and the need, the place of local churches, local parishes within diocese and diocese within a broader church and what have you, that many people coming forward for ordination to deacons and for priesthood are not are locally raised up, and they're not coming into places like Queen's College to do full programs as was happening a generation ago. We still have some of that, and it's so important to it.
Yeah.
But the church needs, and Queen's College and other colleges have the challenge of responding to providing education, credible education programs and formation as well for people who are coming in late vocation into the retirement year, or late career and into retirement to be ordained. So I guess that raises the issue and the challenge for bishops about what requirements they will have, both as academic preparation and spiritual formation and the competencies they expect for a person that are going to ordain as a deacon or as a priest. And then that brings with it, is the person then competent to the point that they can be transferred or make application to other dioceses and what have you. ACPO
That's right.
sort of provided that level of assurance to everyone that someone who has gone through ACPO and has the degrees that are established, and what have you, that they have the competencies.
Yeah.
Their own character being a separate issue, but so that's a challenge, I guess. It reflects, as so many of the themes that you brought to it, a very significant changing landscape and the efforts to respond to the local issues and needs, whether it's about selection of people for ordination or how we manage real estate and investments. You know, there are local issues and there are broader church issues as well. And bishops have to try and keep the local concerns in front of them, as well as the broader church issues.
Yeah. Well, we could spend the whole day talking about that, but you're right. We recognize the need as well for locally raised ministry.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about filling a hole because we don't have clergy. It's about getting the right people in the right parish and making sure that the people and the clergy are doing well.
Yeah.
I do clergy evaluations on a rotational basis. Like, I am never too far away. Like, none of our clergy are ever off my radar, and they all have my cell number, you know. And some clergy have a harder time than others in parishes, and some of them are well trained that are having a rough time.
Oh, yes.
And you have some parishes where the most unlikely people are doing really, really well.
Yep.
Right.
I don't think there's ever been a time in our history where it's been more important for our theological trainers, such as queens and bishops and clergy, to be in good discussions about the future. Again, we can't do it without you, right?
Indeed.
But what's happened at ACPO, it's been dramatic, and for the first year while I was going back and forth between the House of Bishops and the clergy, there was a lot of anger. I became a lightning rod. You know, it was the he said, she said, you did this and you didn't do that. Bishops should do this and bishops should do that. And the bishops are saying to me, well, John, they shouldn't be saying this about us, and they shouldn't be, mad when we do this. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is me in grade 3, right? But we're getting through it. You have to have the fierce conversations, don't you?
Yes.
Right? And when you have the fierce conversation, then you go for a beer.
Yeah.
Have a good laugh.
That sounds good.
Yeah. But it's the intriguing point, though, about the bishop's role in unity, establishing, sustaining, in many cases re-establishing unity within the church is one that really deserves a lot of consideration, and one that, I hadn't really pondered much till your presentation of it today. An interesting and important one.
I think that an important piece in looking at that is that unity does not equal sameness necessarily.
But unity is not uniformity.
No, not at all.
Not at all. Unity is harmony.
Yeah.
You have to figure out what it is that really unites us, what it is that calls us to be one, to recognize that or those marks and to stick to those, and the rest of it is significant, but not of prime significance for sure.
It's interesting to me that the question of the bishop as the center of unity in the church now in the 21st century is echoing, in fact, the situation in the 1st century. Ignatius of Antioch, who was dealing with small Christian community in a pagan society. We are now dealing effectively with small Christian community in a pagan society, or at least in a multicultural society, and sometimes a pagan society, with the question of the New Age systems, spirituality but not religion, etc., etc. And the bishop. So what Ignatius says is, of course, that we're going to find that we have one bishop, one baptism, and one Eucharist. And it's the same, the bishops now, Bishop John and the other 2 bishops here, are facing, in fact, exactly the same problems that Ignatius faced in the 1st century. But I hope that Bishop John does not end up in the arena.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Although maybe the new arena is the Facebook trolls.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. But when you get something like Anik, for example, who have no respect whatsoever for episcopal authority, then the question is, what can a bishop do? And the answer may be nothing whatsoever. You're just facing just a wall.
I think the big thing.
That Dr. Bell.
Bishop John.
And
Dr. Bell died on the other side of the road. This is
all right, David. I'm sorry. Apologies. In the midst of a heated debate at the House of Bishops, one of the really conservative bishops who used to be a really close friend of mine was really having to go, and he looked at me and pointed at me and said, "That's the only man in this room that understands me." And of course, he really put me on the spot, because I don't understand him at all. Although I love him, and that's the point that I made.
Exactly.
And because we were sharing about our diocesan experiences, and I drew attention to that. I said, well, this bishop made that statement, and you all looked at me kind of funny. And I said, well, let me tell you about me. You don't need to know my theology. You don't need to know where I'm from. You don't need to know anything. But what is important about John Watton is that you know that I will never let anything, any difference, any action prevent me from loving this man or loving any person. And I think that's where if a bishop can stay true to that, pay the price for that, and I mean really stay true to that, then you're actually being a bishop. And I think that's pretty much all we have left. And whether you're a parish priest or whatever you might be, or a deacon, if you're involved in a role where you've been given authority by your ordination, the only authority you really have is the authority that's been given to you by the church, by the practicing community, and by the decision they make to love and respect you. You can't demand it.
Yeah.
And that's our huge problem as a church. We have been able to demand it because the culture fed it to us right on a silver spoon. And that's not happening anymore. So whatever success I have or whatever failures I have, well, it's a blessing to know that there are people out there in the church who get that. And I don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Pretty tired some days, but I don't feel alone.
John, Graham speaking. I was at Synod with you 3 years ago, and I remember you saying one thing that I remember is that you would love them, or we need to love them, and be gentle. So I like that, and I remember that. And I think ultimately that's so important. I know, like, when I think of my grandchildren, as long as they know that I love them and I am gentle to them, good things come from that. And I understand, I feel at the parish level there's a lot of disunity, but ultimately, if that sense of love and appreciation and kindness is there, I think a lot of good can come out of that.
Yeah. No matter what happens, we have to refuse to let go of each other, and we have to be tenacious about that. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's Faye Tetford here. I just wanted to make a little general comment. When we're talking about prophetic change, I really believe I am just a Christian sitting in a pew. I don't have any title to me. I don't really aspire to one. But I do love the church, and I think that many people question where we're going in the church. And the answer to that, I feel, has to come from the leadership in the church and the people in the pews working together. It doesn't work, I don't believe, when leadership gives a set of rules that people must follow in order to be acceptable or in order to be deemed appropriate in the pew or in the church. The way forward is to get both the leadership and the people working together. There's challenges there, and as a bishop, you're very good, Bishop John, at staying in touch with people. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't know who you are. But when we're when we're moving towards these boundaries that we all live within right now, how can we step outside those boundaries with support and yet remain in unity? Because if we're all the same and someone steps outside that sameness, there has to be some sort of acceptance or guidance for them as well. What do you think?
Well, you know, there's a lot of truth there, and what you just said shows you actually listened to what I've been saying, and I appreciate that. You know, our church is episcopally led and synodically governed, and that can work. But it's imperative for, excuse me, my voice is starting to, it's imperative for a bishop to understand leadership, to be someone who can build leaders and someone who can read the horizon and determine where the bad weather is coming from. Again, you don't do it alone. You have to do it in council with church. That's why we have synods. I believe in synod. I believe that when a bunch of people come together with diverse ideas, as long as they're prepared to share from their hearts and share from their knowledge, we have to respect knowledge, then the voice of God will speak through synod. And that's how we determine the creeds. That's how we learn how to pray. That's how we develop canons. That's how we ended up with the Bible. Where we're going today, we're going to have to start listening and learning about a whole lot more. just an example, like I'm not a psychologist, but I understand from my reading and my study as a bishop about the psychology of disgust. Now, that's a new term for some of you, but there's a whole theology around that. And someone like Richard Dawkins, who's a geneticist, would say that disgust was actually part of our evolution. Early humans would eat something, would make them sick, and when they returned to it, they would look at it and they would turn their stomachs. They would be disgusted with it. And as humanity developed thinking patterns, communication patterns, gossiping, and these strong reactions against things that bother them, you can see them in our discussions. What is it that disgusts you, and why? How can you develop a theology around that? And you see what I'm saying here? That's not theology that you're going to be able to preach from a pulpit. You're not going to be able to talk about that to the HCW. They'll look at you and say, "What?" But there are, and one thing I need to stop. I don't want to keep going. All I can is that you see what we've been talking about here today indicates the complexity of what we need to do to get ready to talk about the practical issues that we need to deal with. We're not even talking about money here around the table this morning, are we? Or about what we really need to keep this going. As a matter of fact, we are not even prepared to talk about whether or not we need to keep this going.
That's the big one.
The institutional church right now, in 10 years' time, you think about it, as you go through the rest of your day, where are we going to be in 10 years' time? And I mean, in 10 years' time, I'll be almost 30 years old.
But how can we embrace that which comes in 10 years' time? You see, back to loving the problem, right?
Yeah, and I tell you, as a bishop, I'm excited about it. I'm having fun. I'm out there having fun. One of the things that you can do is you can follow me on Facebook, of course, but I'm producing videos as often as I can. Sometimes I'm doing them in airports for kids. I'm doing a confirmation program which sort of talks about the basis of who we are. When I get the confirmation program done, I'm going to tackle spiritual entrepreneurship. And our diocese, we have a document about missional and sustainable churches. Now, I made a big mistake with that document. When I produced it first, I used the word strategically missional. And I said, why did I use the word strategic? But we changed it. It's now intentionally missional. So I beg forgiveness from the diocese, because I tell you, we've had enough strategic plans to last more than a lifetime. So this is not, what we're doing is we're not developing a plan, but we're saying this is what's common to us all. These are the things that we must do, and in order to be in the same boat as we go through ministry together. Mm-hmm. So I'll be doing as much teaching about that as I possibly can. So anyway, and Queen's College is offering a course in spiritual entrepreneurship. I'm really looking forward to seeing where that's going.
Hmm.
Well, that's you're doing a session in the theology of mission for it, and then we will be further developing what we're going to do around some type of a program in missional leadership. Yeah, so we'll be having lots of discussion on it. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to be sharing with us about spiritual entrepreneurship. Yeah. One of the things that come to my mind, we're moving towards the wrap up of the session, though, is like a challenge today, and I think it's very much what we're talking about in current mission initiatives in our church, is that so many people have deep hurts that they connect to the church, either that things were done directly or the culture that we kind of nurtured caused people to have attitudes and be alienated from deeper spiritual matters. And also, I suppose part of it is that we're dealing with people who are have been a bit connected to the church, but somewhat neglected in the nurturing that they have needed to be more familiar with the gospel and with Jesus Christ and part of community and what have you. So there's kind of so much of the approach that we've been taking over the years is that we reach out and we have people that are part of the church, they're born into it, they're baptized or raised within it. We never kind of considered very much whether they're content within it, because they can continue to attend and participate and receive the sacraments of initiation and comforter marriages and funerals and what have you. But now, we haven't really been aware of the need to go to people who've been deeply hurt and feel very hurt and hostile towards the church. We either presume that they're already part of the community and family of the church and nurture them or approach them that way on one hand, or on the other hand, we go about it as if they've never heard of Jesus Christ before, and so it's a whole approach of mission work as if we're off in a foreign land, foreign mission model, But we have the significant obstacle in our culture of people who know enough about the church to be hostile, we might say, or disdain for the church.
The people who are called sort of statistically the Duns, the DONES, we're done with you.
Yeah.
There's a huge group of them.
Yeah.
And they're not done with us for anything that's really related to the gospel. They're done with us for all our institutional, organizational, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's true.
They're still open to the gospel.
Yeah.
They're hungering for the gospel, but they can't handle the institution.
Yes, exactly so.
Yeah.
It may be time for the institution to die, because unless a grain of seed is sown into the ground and died, it's not good for anything.
Yeah.
It may be the church, the institutional church, I suspect that the institutional church has done its job.
Yeah.
And it needs to be, I think it needs to die and to come out in, as Paul would say, a new and transmogrified form.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me leave you with a quote, if that's okay, Dr. Rick.
Yeah.
I recently did a course with the Hatchery LA. It's a group of people in they don't live in Los Angeles, but they're founded there, and they connect globally, and they offer a program on spiritual entrepreneurship. And they are entrepreneurs. They're trying to make $1, but recently did a course with Spencer Burke and Maria French and Dr. Barry Taylor. Now, Spencer was a leader of a megachurch, sort of a Bill Hybels type character. Maria is a young doctoral student, very astute. And Dr. Barry Taylor is a guy from the UK who used to be a roadie for AC/DC. Used to play guitar with them.
Okay.
And his PhD is in pop culture. So, needless to say, he's an interesting cat.
Yeah.
It was a really good program that we did. It was a 12-week certificate course. But anyway, during the course of the program, I was introduced to this gentleman who lives in Ireland. His name is Padraig O'Tama. He's a poet there. Young man, youngish, and devoted Roman Catholic. And he has the he has the leadership of a community called Kori Mila. It's a community that is very active, and you would find this interesting, like in terms of activism and justice. And Padraig himself was gay. He is gay, and submitted himself to the authorities of the Roman Catholic Church 3 separate times for exorcism. So you can imagine what that man went through. And then he realized that, hey, I am who I am. God made me this way. And he tells a story of going to Mass in Dublin with his friend. And he knew that he would not be welcome at communion if the truth was known about him, nor would his friend. His friend wasn't Roman Catholic. He said, but we went to Mass because we loved the worship, we loved the music, we loved the celebration, we loved the priest, the function of a priest. He said, but we didn't go to communion, but we left that and went to our cabin. And when we got there, we had bread and wine. You see? Anyway, he was quoted as saying this in one of his poems: if God is a tree growing among us, we must chop it down and make something useful from it. So I don't know what you make of that. When I first heard it, I said, heresy. And then I realized that Jesus, being equal with God, did not count that as something to be grasped, but made a choice to empty himself. In other words, to allow himself to be cut down and made into something useful.
Yeah.
To love.
And I contacted the poet. I've had discussions with him about the poem, actually, you know, and when I go to Lambeth, I'm hoping to make a trip to Northern Ireland to visit that man. I want to shake his hand.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
The website is really intriguing when you get on to see what their
Which
community
one is
is doing. Mm.
Which one?
The Court Melee. That,
Yes.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
I'll get that from him.
Yeah.
yeah, they've got a good website, Carmel, if you want to look for it, you know.
Yeah, I will.
Anyway,
Okay, anyways, we're
we've
getting
gone over time.
near the end of the time, but let's take a few moments to see if there's any last minute questions, comments, or observations.
No, except that I found it extremely interesting and extremely useful. And I look forward to, if Bishop John, if you continue with the Master's work, I look forward to working with you on it. Really do. There's a lot to be said, a lot to be done, a long way to go. Yeah, great.
Long way to go.
Great start.
Really wonderful.
Thank
Quite
you.
helpful and
Thank you.
Yeah.
inspiring, really.
Yeah.
Gives an appreciation for the church, the place of bishops in the church, and
But I can see exactly why I wanted to go to Canterbury before really getting underway with anything.
Yeah.
That clearly had a profound effect on your thought and understanding of the nature of your own task, Bishop John.
yeah, it really, I can really see the wisdom of that and the grace that it brought you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, anything else from anyone else?
Nothing except to thank you.
Yep.
No, thank you.
Thanks again, Mr. John, and thank you all for those who are online today and those who are viewing this by recording. Glad you have been able to take it in as well.
A real quick, hi, Kathy. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, folks.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again, Bishop John. Bye-bye. Off to you.
Bye now.
I saw her there.